The desert wind howled across the broken alien base, sand dancing like ghosts in the dying light. Dren pulled his jacket tighter and stepped over cracked metal, his boots crunching with every step. The place had been abandoned for months, but the inside still buzzed with quiet energy, flickering screens and half-dead lights. He wasn't here to fight, just to fix the generators, check the system, and get out. But something didn't feel right. The air was too still, the silence too sharp. Like something hidden was watching as he walked deeper. He heard it, a faint sound. Soft, but sharp, like claws on metal. He stopped, turned his head, and heard it again. It came from behind a thick door marked with alien symbols he didn't understand. A guard stood there, bored, picking at his nails. He looked up as Dren approached. "What's behind the door?" Dren asked. The guard shrugged. "Some kind of project, weapon, clone, who knows? Not our problem. Just don't touch it." But Dren couldn't ignore the sound. It was too human, too alive. He waited until the guard left for a smoke break, then used his tools to open the lock. The door slid open with a hiss, and cold air rushed out. Inside was darkness. And in that darkness, two glowing eyes. They stared at him, wide, bright, full of fear. A small figure stood in the corner, chained. By her wrists, armor cracked and stained. She wasn't more than 4 feet tall. Her skin was pale violet, and her body thin like she hadn't eaten in days. When the light hit her face, she hissed like a wild animal and backed into the corner. Dren raised his hand slowly. "It's okay," he whispered. "I won't hurt you." She didn't understand his words, but she seemed to understand his voice. Still, she didn't trust him. Her arms shook. Her eyes darted. Her breathing was fast, sharp. "She's just a weapon," the guard had said. But Dren didn't see a weapon. He saw a girl, scared, dirty, hungry, and alone. He stepped closer, and she growled, sharp teeth flashing, but when he knelt down, she tilted her head in confusion. Dren took off his glove and gently reached out. She tensed, her body frozen, but he didn't grab her, didn't hit her, just touched her hand, and that's when it happened. She shook, not from anger, not from cold. She shook like no one had ever touched her like that before, like she had been trained for war. For violence, but never for kindness. Dren stayed still, letting her feel his warmth. Her hand was rough. Skin cracked, muscles too tight, but after a long moment, she didn't pull away. He looked into her eyes, and she looked back. Something passed between them, a silent understanding. "You're not a thing," Dren whispered. "You're someone." The next day, Dren returned with a piece of bread. She didn't eat it at first, just stared at it like it was a trap. But hunger finally won, and she grabbed it fast, chewing like a starving animal. Crumbs falling everywhere. Every day after that, Dren came back. He brought food, small tools, and sometimes just his voice, telling stories even if she didn't understand the words. Slowly, her eyes began to soften, her body less tense. But the guards noticed. They didn't like it. Why waste time on that thing? One said, "It's just a clone, built to fight." Dren didn't argue. But inside, he was boiling. This girl, this tiny warrior, had been locked away, used, broken, and now, for the first time, someone was treating her like she mattered. One evening, as he finished checking a power relay, he returned to her cell. She was sitting in the middle of the room, waiting. When she saw him, her eyes lit up just a little. Just enough. He sat beside her, and without a word. She reached out first this time, her hand touching his arm. She still shook, but this time, she wasn't afraid. She was waking up. Piece by piece, not as a weapon, but as someone who was finally seen, and that scared the people who made her. Because if she wasn't just a tool anymore, she was something far more dangerous. She was becoming human, and Dren knew, deep in his bones, that this was only the beginning. Asterisk, the desert winds still roared outside. But inside the metal walls of the base, something quiet and powerful was changing. The girl in the cage was no longer snarling, no longer hiding her face. She had stopped shaking so much when Dren came. She would sit cross-legged now, waiting. She didn't speak much, only 1 or 2 words at a time, but her eyes followed him, always, watching his hands. His face, his tools. She was learning. And not just about machines, she was learning about people. Dren had started calling her little warrior, not to tease, but because that's what she was. She had scars on her back, burn marks across her side, signs of long battles, long pain. She had survived more than most adults he knew. And she was still just a child. One day, he brought her a cloth shirt, small, clean, soft. Her old armor was cracked and stained with dried blood. When he handed her the shirt, she didn't know what to do with it at first. She held it like it was gold, rubbing it against her cheek. Then she whispered a new word, one she had never said before. Soft. Dren smiled. Yes, it's soft. She smiled too, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Tiny but pure. It hit him like a punch to the chest. Later that night, he sat alone, staring at the stars from the roof of the base. He wondered who had made her. What kind of monsters would raise a child to be a weapon, train her to kill? But never teach her words like soft. She didn't belong in a cage. She didn't belong in chains. She belonged to no one. But the guards didn't agree. That week, the officers started watching him. They noticed the way she looked at Dren, the way she stayed calm when he was near. One officer even laughed and said, "Looks like the beast thinks you're her master." Now Dren didn't laugh. She didn't need a master. She needed freedom. But freedom was dangerous to the people who built her. A weapon that thinks for itself is a threat. A soldier that asks questions is a risk. And a girl who trusts a human. That was unacceptable. Dren heard the whispers, saw the reports. He knew they were planning something. Maybe a transfer, maybe a wipe, maybe worse. His heart pounded with fear, not for himself, but for her. The next day, he found her sitting. With the wooden ship he had given her, she was turning it in her hands slowly, like it was the most important thing in the world. When she saw him, she held it up and said proudly, "Ship." He knelt beside her. "That's right. That's your ship." She tilted her head. "Home." Dren hesitated. "Do you remember home?" She frowned, tapping her temple with 2 fingers. "Dream," she said. "Big sky, red trees, cold water." Then, gone. Dren swallowed hard. She had memories, maybe broken, maybe few, but they were hers. That meant she wasn't just a tool. She was someone with a past. With roots, with feelings. He wanted to take her away from this place, but he had no plan, no ship, no allies. All he had was a growing bond with a tiny warrior who now sat beside him like a shadow. That evening, something strange happened. One of the guards, a cruel man with sharp eyes, came to her cell with a stun stick. "Time for testing," he said. Dren stood in the hallway, his stomach twisting. He heard her cry out once, then silence. He rushed in, furious, and found her curled on the floor. Breathing hard, the guard turned to him. Laughing, "She tried to bite me." Had to teach her manners. Before Dren could speak, the girl stood up, wobbling, face pale. She walked over and wrapped her arms around Dren's leg, her tiny fingers gripping his pants tightly, her face buried against his side. She had never done that before, not to anyone. The guard's face went cold. "That's not right," he muttered. "She's bonding. That's not protocol." Dren didn't care about protocol. All he knew was that in that moment, she chose him, not because he owned her, not because he controlled her, but because he treated her like she mattered. That night, Dren couldn't sleep. He sat by her door until morning. Eyes heavy, heart full of worry. She didn't belong in a lab. She didn't belong behind glass. She belonged under the sky she dreamed about. And maybe, just maybe, he could help her find it again, even if the whole system turned against him. Even if it cost him everything, because she was not a thing, not a weapon, not property. She was a girl, and she belonged to no one. The sky above the base had turned red with dust. Storm winds were coming, but inside the metal halls, something much quieter and stronger was forming. Dren had started spending more time near the little warrior's cell. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. She had started to wait for him. Sitting cross-legged on the cold floor, holding her little wooden ship close to her chest. When he arrived, her head would turn, her eyes would brighten just a little. Like sunlight touching ice, she didn't speak much, only small words, broken phrases. But Dren noticed something else. She was watching, learning. Her eyes followed. Everything he did, the way he repaired machines, the way he walked, even how he smiled. One day, he brought her a small light cube. It was used to teach children show images. Play sounds. He activated it, and soft blue stars appeared in the air above them. Her eyes widened as she reached out, fingers sliding through the floating stars. "That's the Andari belt," Dren said softly, pointing. "That's where I was born." She looked at him, confused but curious. "And Ari," she repeated slowly. He nodded. "Yes, Andari, my home." She touched her chest. "Kai?" she asked, unsure. Dren blinked. "Is that your name?" She nodded again. "Quiet, small. Kai." He smiled gently. Then, "Hello, Kai." That night, Dren wrote a report, like always, but this time he didn't write what the commanders wanted. He didn't call her the subject. He called her by name. Kai has begun to speak. She responds to kindness. She remembers things. The next day, Dren brought a puzzle cube, a children's toy from Earth. He twisted it once, showed her, then handed it over. Kai looked at it like it was magic. Then, slowly, carefully, she started to twist the pieces. Her fingers were clumsy at first, but fast. In less than 5 minutes, the cube was solved. Dren stared in shock. "How did you—" Kai held it out. "Proud, easy," she said, with a tiny smirk. He laughed, for the first time in days, and she laughed too. A high, strange sound, but real. Every day after that, he brought something new. A music player, a simple book, a small mirror. When she saw her own reflection for the first time, she touched her face slowly, like she was trying to understand what she truly looked like. But as her trust grew, so did the danger. The officers started asking questions. Why was she speaking? Why was she calm? Why was she no longer acting like a tool? "She's responding to human contact," Dren explained. "She's more than just a weapon. She's someone." They didn't like that answer. One cold morning, Kai wasn't in her cell. Panic rose in Dren's chest. He searched the base, his boots echoing on metal floors. Then he heard a soft humming and found her sitting on the roof, curled up under a cloth blanket, her wooden ship beside her. He sat down next to her. Breathless with relief, "You scared me." She looked up at him and whispered, "Sky. I wanted to see it." Dren looked up too, the stars barely visible through the red dust. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. She leaned against his side and whispered, "Home." He nodded slowly. "We'll find it, Kai, I promise." The door behind them opened. One of the officers stood there, arms crossed, cold eyes watching. "She needs to go," he said. "We're transferring her to Sector Lab 7, mind wipe scheduled in 2 days. Dren stood up fast. "No, she's not dangerous. She's unpredictable." The officer snapped, "You're too close. We warned you." Dren looked back at Kai, who stood quietly behind him, clutching the toy ship like her life depended on it. Her eyes didn't show fear, they showed Understanding, she knew they were going to take her away. That night, she didn't speak, just sat by the door while Dren stood outside, their hands pressed to the glass between them, her small fingers against his, her eyes never looking away. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. He had to make a choice. Soon, a choice between following orders or following his heart. The next day, when he entered the cell, she stood up and walked. To him, without hesitation, her voice was soft but steady. "I stay with you," she said, "not them." Dren knelt down and put his hands on her shoulders. "Then we need to run, Kai. We need to leave, fast." She didn't shake this time. She didn't flinch. She just nodded. For the first time in her short life, someone had taught her more than how to fight. He had taught her how to trust, and now they would both risk everything to protect that trust. Together, the morning sky above the base was quiet. Too quiet. The storm had passed, but something colder had taken its place. Silence, that kind of silence where even the machines seemed to hold their breath. Dren walked through the halls with heavy steps. Soldiers passed him without speaking. Some gave short nods, others looked away. Everyone had heard the order. Sector Lab 7 was ready, and the subject Kai would be moved tonight. He had read the message in his quarters, blinking at the screen like it was a bad dream. Transfer approved. Subject 1 to be Kai. To Sector Lab 7. Memory reset procedure in 24 HFY had gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. His mind screamed, but he kept his face calm. If they knew how much she meant to him, they would act faster, colder, harsher. Kai didn't know yet. She was sitting in her cell, softly humming a tune from the light cube he had given her. The little wooden ship was beside her. As always, her smile grew when he entered, but it faded the moment she saw his face. "You sad," she whispered. Dren knelt beside her. "Kai, I need you to listen to me." Her head tilted, eyes sharp, alert like a soldier again, but softer now. "They're coming to take you. They want to erase your memories, everything you've learned, everything you felt. Even your name." She blinked. The words heavy. Too much for someone her size. "Forget." "You." He nodded slowly. "Yes. And you won't remember me, or the stars, or your little ship." Her hands tightened around the toy, her small lips shaking. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No." Dren reached out and held her hands in his. "We can run, Kai, but you have to trust me. You have to be brave, braver than ever." "I stay with you," she said again, but this time, her voice didn't shake. That night, he used his clearance. To unlock the outer hangar, the path to the shuttle bay was short, but crawling with security drones and silent patrols. He gave her a small gray cloak to cover her armor, and together, they moved through the halls like shadows. She followed every step he took, quiet as wind, quick as light. At one corner, a guard passed by, and she froze behind a crate. When he was gone, she looked at Dren with eyes wide, not with fear but readiness. She wasn't just escaping. She was fighting for herself. They reached the hangar door. But the control panel flashed red. Locked. Emergency lockdown in place. Dren cursed under his breath. Someone knows. Behind them, the alarm blared. Red lights pulsed down the hallway. Footsteps echoed like drums, growing louder. "Kai." "Hide," he said, drawing his shock rod. But she didn't hide. She stood beside him, eyes narrowed. Her small hand pulled something from under her cloak, a training blade she had hidden in her boot. "No more cage," she said. The first guard burst through the door. Gun raised, Dren fired his rod first, dropping the man with a single shot. But more came, 2, then 5, then 10. Kai moved like lightning. Her body spun low and fast, blade flashing blue. She didn't kill, she struck to disable. Every move controlled, she had learned more than kindness. She had learned mercy, even in battle. Dren hit the emergency release and the hangar door slid open with a screech. Smoke and sparks filled the air. A small shuttle waited beyond lights. Blinking, engines warming, go. He shouted, but Kai hesitated, watching him fight off a guard. Her chest rose and fell fast. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her heart stayed. She leaped back, blade slicing through the guard's stun. Cable Dren looked at her, stunned. I told you to go. She shook her head, eyes burning. I'm not leaving you. They climbed into the shuttle together, hands slamming buttons. Voices blending with the sound of engines powering up as they lifted off. Laser fire sparked around them. A blast rocked. The shuttle sideways, but it held. The stars opened above them, vast and endless. Waiting? Kai sat in the seat beside him, shaking, not from fear, but from what she had done, what she had chosen. I fight for me now, she whispered. Dren looked over at her and nodded. And I fight for you. The ship soared into the sky, disappearing into the black, back at the base. The officers stared at the empty cell, the broken chains, and the report that read, Subject 1 to B. Escaped status, unknown, but Dren knew better. She wasn't unknown anymore. She was Kai. She had a name, a will, and a choice. And no one, no army, no command, no empire would ever erase her again. The shuttle trembled as it broke through the planet's upper clouds. Red lightning cracked outside the windows. The storm had arrived, thick with dust and electric winds. Dren tightened his grip on the controls. Jaw clenched. The ship was old, half-repaired, barely holding together. Kai sat beside him, strapped in. Her small hands gripping the edge of her seat. Her eyes didn't blink. She wasn't scared of the storm. She was scared of being caught again. Hold on, Dren said, as the ship dipped hard to the left. They weren't flying in a clear path. They were flying blind. Behind them, two pursuit crafts screamed through the clouds, blue lasers cutting. The sky, the base, had launched them just minutes after Dren and Kai escaped. These weren't search teams. They were hunters, given orders to destroy. Dren pushed the shuttle down into a canyon carved by ancient rivers. The walls were steep, close, almost scraping the wings. The winds howled louder, but the rocky edges gave them cover. Kai crawled up beside him and pointed at a blinking red button. Boost, she said. Press, you sure? Dren asked, surprised she even knew what it did. She nodded quickly, eyes sharp. He hit the button and the shuttle jolted forward with a roar. The engines screamed, the panels shook, but the extra thrust shot them ahead like a bullet. One of the enemy ships tried to follow and slammed into the canyon wall, exploding into fire and smoke. Kai smiled a little. But her face turned serious again, fast. One left, she whispered. Dren checked the scanner. Yeah, and it's close. He turned the ship into a narrow pass, tighter than before, rocks scraping along the hull. Sparks flew inside, and alarms screamed in his ears. Kai grabbed the wall to stay upright. Her wooden ship had fallen from her pocket and rolled under the seat. She stared at it, then reached down fast to grab it. Don't lose it, Dren said, trying to stay calm. Never, she whispered, holding it close. The last enemy ship fired a torpedo. Red and glowing, Dren's eyes widened. Brace. He turned the shuttle sharply, just in time. The torpedo missed, slamming into the canyon wall, the shockwave throwing both ships sideways. Dren's shuttle spun out, lights flickering, engine coughing smoke. They hit the ground hard, sliding across the desert floor until everything stopped. Silence. Dust filled the cockpit. Dren blinked, pain screaming in his shoulder. He turned quickly. Kai. I'm okay, she said, coughing, her hands still wrapped around the wooden ship. Her nose bled a little, but she was awake. Alert, The enemy ship hovered above them now. Charging weapons for a final strike. Dren's ship couldn't fly anymore. Not in this state, he looked around fast. They were near a rocky hill, a place to hide, but only if they moved fast. Out. Now? Dren yelled, unbuckling her strap and grabbing a pack of tools and emergency supplies. Together, they ran across the sand, the wind slapping their faces. The enemy ship fired behind them, but missed. The shot carving a smoking trench where they had just been. They dove behind rocks, breathing hard, hearts pounding. The ship circled above, scanning, looking for movement. Kai leaned against him, whispering, "They don't stop." "No," Dren said, "but neither do we." He pulled out a small signal jammer, hooked it to a power cell, and tossed it as far as he could down the hill. It blinked once, then twice, then burst with static. The enemy ship turned sharply and flew toward the false signal, firing wildly. That was their chance. Dren and Kai moved again, crawling through a narrow cave entrance hidden by rock. Inside, it was cold and dark, but safe for now. They lit a small lamp and sat near each other, breaths still fast, hands still shaking. Dren looked at her, really looked at her, dirt on her cheeks, cuts on her arms, but still strong, still here. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes, because I'm with you." Dren smiled tiredly. "You were amazing out there, Kai. You kept calm, you moved smart." "I learned from you," she whispered. They sat in silence for a while, listening for sounds. Outside, but only the storm answered. Soft now, fading. Kai finally looked up at him. "Where will we go?" Dren sighed. "There's a colony near the edge of the system. Small, peaceful. They don't follow the council. We might be safe there, just for a little while." She nodded, then leaned against his shoulder. Still holding her ship, "I don't want to be a weapon anymore." "You're not," Dren said gently. "You're a person. You always were." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "They told me I belonged in a cage, that I was born for war. They were wrong," he said. "You belong under the stars." Kai, not behind walls. Outside, the storm slowly passed, but a greater storm was coming. The council wouldn't let them go easily. But for now, they had each other, and that meant they still had hope. The cave opened into a valley of silence. Broken wreckage lay across the red sand, half buried by time, rusted pieces of alien ships' armor. And weapons were scattered like forgotten history. The storm behind them was gone. But this place held a different kind of chill. Kai walked beside Dren, the wooden ship clutched in her hands. Her eyes scanned the valley with quiet fear. Not of enemies, but of memory. Her steps slowed, her breath short. As if the ground itself was heavy under her feet, Dren noticed her change. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer at first, just stared at a large, cracked metal pod half sunken in sand. Then she whispered, "This place. I've seen it." Dren frowned. "Seen it?" She pointed to her head, in dreams. In pain, he followed her gaze to the broken pod. Old markings were still burned into the sides, unreadable now, but the structure looked like a cloning chamber. Dren's stomach turned. "This is where they made you," he said quietly. Kai walked toward the pod. Slow and stiff like her body remembered this place even if her mind didn't. She reached out and touched the cold metal, then jerked back as if it burned her inside the pod. The bones of another lay crumbled, small, like hers, armored like hers, but old, unmoving. Kai fell to her knees and bowed her head. Her shoulders shook, not from fear, but from something deeper, grief. Dren knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her back. She didn't move away. "I wasn't the first," she whispered. "Others came before, others died." Dren looked around the valley, seeing it with new eyes. Dozens of pods, cracked helmets, and tiny skeletal hands reaching for freedom they never found. They never gave you a chance, he said, voice low. They made you to fight, and when you broke, they replaced you. She nodded, tears finally rolling down her dusty cheeks. I remember screams. I remember fire. Dren wanted to take it all away, the pain. The memories, the lies they forced into her mind, but he couldn't, so he stayed, quiet, solid. A shelter she could lean on. She placed the wooden ship at the base of the old pod like a gift. Then stood. I won't be like them, she said, voice shaking but strong. I live, I choose. Dren stood beside her, pride swelling in his chest. You're free now, Kai. That's something none of them ever were, as they moved deeper into the valley. They found more signs of the failed project training. Arenas, broken droids, twisted cages. Kai avoided some of them, eyes turning dark, remembering. But then they reached a hill, and at its top stood a stone marker, weathered and simple. It wasn't made by the ones who created her. It was placed by someone else, maybe another worker. Maybe someone who tried to honor what was lost. Dren wiped dust from the words carved roughly into the stone. They were not weapons. They were children. Kai stared at the words for a long time, then reached into her pocket and placed a broken piece of her own old armor beside the stone. It was her way of saying goodbye. They built a small fire that night under the stars. Dren cooked simple rations while Kai sat beside the flames. Her face was calm, but her eyes were far away, watching something only she could see. Do you hate them? Dren asked after a while. She shook her head. No, I feel sad. They were afraid of me, so they made me into a monster. But I'm not one. No. Dren said, you're not. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. If I had met you first, maybe I would have smiled sooner. That broke something inside him. Not in pain, but in warmth. He reached out and gently placed his hand over hers. This time, she didn't shake. She just held on. They watched the stars together. The silence. Between them, peaceful now. Not heavy, not cold, in the distance. The enemy ships still searched, blinking lights like angry eyes. But here, in this valley of ghosts, they had found something more powerful than escape. They had found truth. Kai leaned her head on Dren's shoulder and whispered, they made me from bones. But I'm more than that now. You are, Dren said softly. You're alive. You're free, and you're not alone. That night, the fire burned low. The stars above were endless. And in the place of bones, a girl once made to be a weapon became someone worth saving, and someone who would never be forgotten. The stars above the valley began to fade as morning light touched the jagged cliffs. Dren stirred from sleep, his back aching from the cold ground. Kai was already awake, sitting on a rock nearby, her face calm but alert, her small hands rested. In her lap, her old blade beside her, she had changed. Not just on the outside, the cuts and bruises. The stronger steps, but inside too. Her eyes no longer darted with fear. Her body no longer tensed at every shadow. She was still a warrior, but now she fought like someone who had something to protect. They didn't speak much that morning. Both of them knew time was short. The tracker on the broken shuttle might have been weak, but it wasn't silent. The council would find them soon, and they did. By noon, a loud hum filled the valley. Dren looked up and saw a command transport ship cutting across the sky, dark and wide, followed by smaller escort drones. This wasn't a rescue team. This was a strike unit. They found us, Dren said, pulling Kai close. We have to run. Kai didn't move. She stood still, eyes locked on the approaching ship. No, she said quietly. We make a stand, Kai. She turned. Her voice stronger now. I've run all my life. Not anymore. Dren paused, then nodded. He could see it in her face. Not fear, not anger, but choice. She wasn't doing this because she had to. She was doing it because she wanted to. They moved fast. Setting traps with Dren's tools, placing signal. Jammers and flash mines near the narrow paths between the rocks. Kai climbed up to a ledge and positioned herself with perfect balance, blade in hand, eyes sharp when the soldiers landed. They came with stun rifles and shock rods, wearing polished black armor and no emotions. Their leader shouted through a speaker, "Return the prototype to custody." Lethal force authorized if resistance is met. Kai didn't wait for the first shot. She moved like lightning, dropping from the rocks into the path of the front unit. Her blade hit hard, not to kill, but to stop, to disarm. She kicked one soldier into the dirt, spun, and knocked another to the ground. Dren fired a flash mine, blinding Timur. His heart raced as he watched her, small, fast, and fearless. But it was more than speed. It was how she moved, not like a machine, not like a tool. She fought with care, with heart. She didn't go for the kill. She protected Dren. She protected herself. But she still gave mercy when she could. One of the drones flew over the rocks and fired toward her. Dren tackled her to the ground, both of them rolling behind cover. The shot missed, but barely. "You okay?" he gasped. She smiled, just a little. "You fight good for an old man." He laughed, despite the chaos. "Thanks, warrior." The two of them stood again, side by side, facing the soldiers who now surrounded them. The leader stepped forward, his voice cold. "Stand down, Subject 1 to B. Your memories will be erased and your programming reset." Kai walked forward slowly. Her blade hung at her side. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I am not a subject. I am Kai. I am alive. I belong to no one." The officer raised his weapon. "Then you are a threat." Kai didn't wait. She rushed forward, leaping high, knocking the weapon aside with her blade, spinning and striking the helmet. The man fell, hard, unmoving. The remaining soldiers hesitated, staring at her, unsure. This wasn't a wild creature. This wasn't a mindless clone. This was someone with fire in her heart. Someone who moved like she had purpose, like she was loved. They began to back away, confused, leaderless now, unsure what to do. Dren stepped forward beside Kai, bruised and bleeding but still standing. "She's not your weapon anymore," he said. "She's her own person now, and if you try to take her, you'll have to go through both of us." The soldiers didn't move. A long pause filled the air. Then the transport ship began to lift off, engines humming louder. A signal blinked on their wrist consoles. Mission abort. They turned, one by one, and walked away. When the sound of the engines faded into the sky, Dren turned to Kai, breathing hard. "You did it," he said, voice shaking. "You stopped them." She dropped her blade and fell to her knees, breathing. Fast Dren rushed over and caught her in his arms, holding her tightly. "I'm tired," she whispered. "You've earned rest," he said, voice soft. "You've earned everything." Kai leaned her head against his chest, her small fingers clutching his shirt. "Am I still precious?" she asked. He looked down at her eyes, full of warmth, more than ever, that night. They stayed in the valley, under the same stars that had watched over her whole life. But this time, Kai wasn't a weapon hiding in the dark. She was a girl. She was free, and she had fought like someone who had finally been shown what love felt like.